Another day, another Peter Brett book to talk about. Today we'll be talking about the Desert Spear. And most of this book is talking about the start of an in-world event called the Daylight War, which is not to be confused with the next book in the series titled The Daylight War, which mostly focuses on the First War. But we'll get into that later. You can really see in this book how Peter Brett has gotten better at telling his stories. The organization is just a lot better overall, I think. It feels less disjointed. And at the same time, he's still sticking to his guns and telling you the things that he thinks are important. Particularly the way he handles flashbacks or prologues, whatever you want to call it. A third of this book takes place earlier in time from what I consider the current day. Again, I really like the way he does this. It feels like he respects the reader's ability to remember things, unlike a certain author of The Broken Empire. No, I'm not letting that go. The way he did that was abysmal. You get to see a lot more of the Jardir character's upbringing through this basically 200-page prologue, and how he and Arlen relate to each other, how they met, how they get along, things like that. And I like the way he's done it with these extremely long prologues. But then again, I like Sanderson, and Sanderson kind of does similar things, so maybe I'm just a sucker for exposition dumps. I really like how in this particular flashback, you get to see just how brutal Jardir's culture is. You get some hints of it in the first book when you're wandering around with Arlen, but this gives you a very in-depth look of just the kind of brutal society they live in. And it gives you a better understanding for why everyone in that culture is the way they are. Getting out of the flashbacks, you start to see new characters being introduced. You see old characters being brought back. And this is a part that I think Brett might still be a little weaker on at this point. You can kind of tell the difference between new characters being introduced or old ones being brought back that are never really going to be important compared to the ones that they're going to be. And to be clear, not all the characters brought into this book are important in this book, but you can almost feel how they're going to have a pretty significant part of the story in future books, whereas a new minor character being brought in just feels a little different. I'm not sure if that's how everyone reacts to his characters, but that's the impression I got largely. This isn't really a bad thing. It's just an interesting one. As you can see, he's bringing in more characters. He's making them important. You get much more of Jardir and Rena, who was only really briefly mentioned in the first book. I guess that's about it. They only really brought in a couple characters as really important. You start to see a little more of Jardir's wife, who's fairly important, and of course they bring in more of the secondary characters that are, I don't know, I'd classify them as important but not as important, like Garrett or Wanda. But this book is really exploring the start of the Daylight War and how that's going. And I'm not really going to get into what the Daylight War is because that would be a bit spoilery, but it's important for the overall story that is being told here. One thing that I'm of mixed opinions about is that towards the end of the book, you see an expansion on the magic, or perhaps not an expansion, but the hint that the the overarching, very hard magic system is built on top of a much softer system. In this book, it was pretty brief, I'm not really getting into what it is because that's kind of at the end of the book and pretty climactic. But you start to see some of the underlying structure to the magic. And as someone who really loves a hard magic system, I tend to be of two opinions about this because giving us more details about it is always a good thing. Those details suggesting that it's not as hard or rigid a magic system as we were led to believe in the first book. I don't know. It feels a little annoying because I just like a good hard magic system, I guess. Overall, it's still an excellent book. I like the first one more, but I think the second one is better written, if that makes sense. One of the things I did like, and this is to do with the Rena character, is you get a better feel for Arlen's hometown. In the first book, you spend very little time in this town. You're basically there to get a feel for who Arlen is, and then you're gone. Some of the characters from that town might be brought up on occasion, but you don't really see them. But in this book, you have a moment where Arlen's going back, and you get to see just a little more of where a lot of his formative years were spent. And of course, Rena is brought more into the forefront, which you have to go back to bring her into this. And it's well done because as a reader, you get the feeling that, you're getting more details, but you're also very subtly being told that, look, this still isn't particularly important, but here's a nice break. It feels like a vacation from the constant action just to get to some nice slice of life events here and there. And that's really only talking about one specific aspect of going back to Tibbetsbrook. There are other aspects that are very much not that, but I'm deliberately not talking about to avoid spoilers. But yeah, overall, it's a great book. Like I said, it's much better written, even if I don't like it as much. Although it's a pretty close call, so that's not really saying a whole lot. And if you haven't read The Warded Man or The Demon Cycle and you're looking for fantasy, you should. It's a completed series, so you don't have to wait for the author's admittedly slow output rate, but it's a great series, and this particular installment holds up. If you like this video, please leave a like, if not a dislike, and if anyone's read The Demon Cycle, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on it in the comment section. Although I do ask you to avoid spoilers. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.